Well, Bike Week is rolling around here in the city of Winnipeg. It's not only a great way to get out and get active this summer, but it also changes your perspective on the city you live in. Bike Historic Winnipeg is a great example of this. It's a collection of tours that offer a whole new way of engaging with the city and the stories that comprise it. In particular, Bike Historic Winnipeg will be showcasing the historic St. Boniface district each Thursday night in the summer. These tours are led by Raymond Sokalski, who joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning, Nolan.
Thank you so much for joining us. Well, maybe we can start by, maybe you can tell us what inspired you to start these tours in the first place. What maybe was the inspiration point for wanting to showcase this part of Winnipeg in particular on a bike?
Sure. For 30 years of my life, I was a high school history teacher close to downtown Winnipeg at Kelvin High School. And a highlight for me, and I think for the students every year, judging by how much they talked about it afterwards, was a tour that we did of the Exchange District, Upper Fort Garry, ending at the Forks every year. It took most of the day, and students did it on their blades or their bikes or on foot. And it brought everything we've been studying into the classroom alive and relevant, because history is lived right here in the streets of our city. And Winnipeg's been at the center of Canadian history for so many points along the way. So that's where it started. Then COVID, and people were looking for activities to do that were outdoors to be safe. And I had just retired from teaching. I had just begun a job at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. And this seemed a good way to pay it forward in the community. I know local artists, including my wife, were offering free concerts. And so this was something that I could do. And it's continued in that fashion. So these tours are just free of charge. And they're just a way of awakening people to the richness of our cultural past.
Absolutely. Should mention the wife that you just mentioned, of course, being Tracy Dahl, who Classic 107 audience is very familiar with. Maybe to get back to these tours and what they look like on a sort of brass tacks scale. When people join you for these tours, what can they expect?
Well, they would meet me at a market at the foot of the Provencher Bridge on the St. Boniface side, and we'd go for an hour-long bike ride. It covers maybe 2.5 kilometers, so it's not an exhausting run. I'm not breathlessly yelling things at you as we scream by them. It's at a pretty leisurely pace. We have about 13 stops along the way of those 2.5 kilometers. And we're peeking at hidden corners or buildings that you would pass every day in your car if you're going over the bridge, but just getting sort of a background to how they came to be and what role they played, and especially the people behind those buildings.
So one of the people that you will be showcasing on this tour actually has quite a connection to this city's musical history. What can you tell us about that?
Well, this gentleman here is Marius Benoit, and it's a very, stereotypical photo of someone who's got a conducting baton in his hand. He's associated with one of the oldest homes in St. Boniface. It's called Kitson House, and it's tucked in sort of behind the St. Boniface Public Library. Interestingly, not the place it sat in St. Boniface at the time that Marius Benoit lived in it. Marius Benoit and his family were a cultural force of nature in the mid-20th century in St. Boniface history. So he founded the St. Boniface Sinfonietta, an orchestra that put on concerts for decades, starting in his own home, where he crammed 60 people into his living room and dining room into basically a log cabin that was updated, and then moved on to stage operas, to be the founder of the Musée de Saint-Boniface, the St. Boniface Museum, member of the Cercle Molière, just a real cultural force in the city of St. Boniface as it was at the time. So he's one of the people that we meet along the way with deep roots in, well, Winnipeg in the larger sense, in its cultural history, musical history.
It's amazing to consider all of the contributions that this gentleman made to the history of Winnipeg, the musical, cultural history of this city and to St. Boniface specifically. And yet, it occurs to me that if you were to just be in your car, going about your day, you would just pass by this house and not necessarily appreciate the significance, the cultural significance of the person who lived there. What do people maybe take away about Winnipeg's history when they are seeing these sites and encountering these characters on a bike versus maybe some other form of transportation?
I think for many who've done the tour, they because you're surrounded 360 top to bottom with clear view. It's different than sitting a little lower down in a car or even higher up in an SUV. You're getting a limited frame through your windshield, and when you're riding on your bike and you have a chance to stop and gaze up or gaze around the corner, you notice things that are clear signs of something that's intriguing about the past. One of the stops we make is at a former brewery. And when you gaze up at this old chimney that you don't really notice in your car because you won't see the top of it, it's that tall, you notice a very rusty steel letter welded to the top of the chimney, the letter K. And immediately anybody who's on foot or on bike is going to wonder, well, why is that up there? And what was this building? And then you learn it was a brewery that opened just as Prohibition ended in St. Boniface, but was still going on south of the border, and that the K stands for a North Dakota family that moved north of the border in order to take advantage of the end of Prohibition. And so it's a fascinating story, and just one of many that you're going to be curious about when you're on your bike as opposed to being in your vehicle.
Absolutely. I mean, it sounds like this has been something that you've been cultivating now, this sort of sense of history via a maybe slower means of transportation for a number of years. You mentioned that these tours sort of began back during your career as a high school teacher. Is this sort of lens for looking at Winnipeg's history something that takes a while to cultivate? Or do you find with the people who take these tours that they immediately just sort of get it? They go, wow, this is absolutely a different way to look at Winnipeg and to appreciate the stories that comprise it.
Yeah, I think many people comment on the fact that they've taken walking tours before or they've been on bus tours before. But I think being on a bike is a sort of a blend of the two and can bring out the best of both. So in a bus tour, you're going to have to stop when the bus driver stops, but you cover a lot of sites in a given amount of time. And a walking tour, you can only walk so far before it gets to be arduous. On a bike, you can cover still a couple, maybe several kilometers. I know for other itineraries that I do that go from the Assiniboia Indian Residential School all the way down to the Forks, we cover quite a bit of ground, but in a way that's manageable, and you sort of get a sense of the breadth and the micro version of history.
So you mentioned that there are other tours that you do in addition to the one that you are leading on Thursday nights in St. Boniface. Maybe a quick little word on how people can engage in those other sorts of bike tours if they want to see a different part of the city or engage in a different facet of the city's history.
Sure. So on weekends, Saturdays, Sundays, and Mondays, because the museum is closed on Monday, so I'm free to give them then. I run tours of the Exchange District, of St. Boniface, and of First Peoples. And so that would be beginning, as I mentioned, at the former Assiniboia Indian Residential School and ending at the Forks. So those are, I think I have 4 itineraries altogether. Another one covers the legislative grounds and Upper Fort Garry in detail. So those are arranged just by contacting me at bikehistoricwinnipeg@gmail.com. I don't have a website, but I can fill you in on the details if you contact me that way.
Excellent. And we'll be linking to that information to get in touch with you about these tours at our website later on today. You don't need a website. That's what we're here for, Raymond. Classic107.com and the Classic 107 app. The first of these St. Boniface tours that you are offering through Bike Historic Winnipeg taking place tonight, I understand, at 5:30. And once again, we will make sure to get you the information for that ride and for future rides on Thursday nights in St. Boniface. Raymond Sokalski, thank you so much for taking the time to tell us more about these tours, and happy biking throughout the summer.
Thank you, Nolan. Thanks so much.